right, fellas. We are here today to talk about your journey. You are coming at us from transistor.fm. Justin, can you give us a bit of background on yourself?
I started podcasting in 2012, I think, and was definitely into the idea of radio. Some of these are transistor radios, which is on brand. I grew up in Alberta, which is like kind of conservative country here in Canada. And so there's lots of talk radio stations, and had lots of good memories of driving around in the truck with my dad, listening to talk radio. Even like, I remember being a kid and like, once I got my license and I was driving by myself, I would like turn off the radio and pretend I was on the show. Like the host would say something and then I'd pretend I was like talking back and forth. So the idea of broadcasting via audio was always really appealing to me. And when I moved to this town, actually, it's a pretty small town, and I wanted to stay connected with the broader tech community. One of the first things I did was start a podcast called Product People, which was just interviewing product people from all over the world. And that experience, I think, basically almost every good thing that's happened in my career since then can be traced back to starting that podcast.
Amazing.
Because the relationships I built, the connections I made, the things I learned, and then just the act of building an audience and putting something out there that people connect with was really significant. So yeah, podcasting for me has been a big part of my professional life starting around 2012. I think that's kind of how things work a lot of times. It's why it's hard to reverse engineer any entrepreneurial success, because often people will tell one part of the story, but there's usually quite a few layers. And for me personally, like if I didn't have that layer of like really being into talk radio, I don't know if I would have been as interested in podcasting. If I didn't have the layers, I mean, this is when like those early computer experiences are foundational. Like those, without that experience, making things on computers, starting in the 80s and 90s, kind of becoming teenagers right when the web was coming out. So like the Mosaic web browser, I think, came out in 93. I mean, that was when I was 13 years old. So all of those layers kind of build up and eventually culminate in, you know, maybe a business bet that pays off. Or
yeah, I mean, I've probably been coding since I was like 11 or something. So 30 something years later, like in another life, I probably would have been some sort of physical engineer, like electrical engineer or something. But the feedback loop from coding is so tight, it's like hard to give up that like instant hit of success that you can get. So I sort of glommed onto that pretty early, I guess. But yeah, so I went to school not for software development at all. I like got enamored with finance and like watched Wall Street and thought that stuff was all super cool. So I went to school for that, and I'm like hearing from my friends as they're coming back from like their first jobs, and they're talking about how they're just like cold calling people 12 hours a day and like trying to hawk like whatever they're supposed to hawk. I'm like, that sounds terrible. What you're doing. So I like wound up sort of switching gears and realizing that software was like, it wasn't like clear that was a career path at the time. It was like just becoming something that seemed like you could do professionally.
Jason's done a lot of cool other stuff in software as well. He had he was part of a video game company for a while.
I ran a little video game studio with a couple friends, and we built a massively multiplayer like 2D crafting game. It got pretty popular. Like I think, but all said and done, we had 1.5 million registered users.
Yeah, I think this is one of the cool things about running a small company is that we've been able to bring in all these people we've met like throughout our lives, and like to have someone like Jason's caliber on the team, and we're so small. I think Jason described at one time, you're like the nice thing about Transistor is like we're all killers. Like we just like all show up and we're really like good at what we do. We're passionate about what we do. And there's very little cruft. It's just like a lean team trying to build amazing product, really customer focused, really customer service focused, but at the same time trying to build a really good life for ourselves and, having good time off, having slowing down during the holidays, being more relaxed. Like we have no KPIs right now, really. That's what we were talking about before. We can just trust everybody on the team to kind of show up every day and do great work. And it's been really fun.
You can see that in the product. Like a lot of people often comment like how simple things are and how uncluttered everything is. And like a lot of that is because we just have to ruthlessly like pare down what we're building because of the time available. And those constraints are, I think, lead to a good product.
You're being very deliberate and you're being okay with it being that deliberate and not feeling like I need to add these 20 new features because that's what people are asking for.
John and I, we developed this strategy of wait and see. So like something would come up and it'd be like, we got to do this or the company's going to fail. And then we started realizing we could just wait and see what happened. And often, it ended up not being a big deal, or it ended up manifesting itself, evolving in a different direction than we had originally thought. And then you can also see what everyone else has done, the reception, from everyone else. In a lot of ways, AI transcription, which is what we've just added, was that kind of feature. We've been talking about it for years.
For a long time, yeah.
And it just kind of always bubbled around. Should we be thinking about this? Jason was doing experiments on his own with different models. And eventually it kind of bubbles up and then it reaches this high watermark and it's like, okay, now it feels like we should act. Like now is the time.
Part of it is that technology kind of caught up with our needs. Like the availability of a lot of this stuff, at least as far as I can tell, is pretty new. At scale and at a cost that is viable, that we can do it, or we can price it at a level that our customers find palatable. So we're plugging in Deepgram transcriptions now, obviously, which is why we're chatting. And the speed and the quality of it has been just phenomenal. Like we've been really, really pleased with what we're getting out. We've got a handful of users beta testing it now, transcribing their podcasts, and I think it's going swimmingly.
Give us a bit of background on the tool.
I mean, simply, Transistor is podcast hosting the same way that you need web hosting for a website, you need podcast hosting for your podcast. We help people host their podcast. They upload their content to us, and then we distribute it via RSS to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pocket Casts, Google Podcasts, all of the different players. And then we also offer additional services on top. So podcast analytics, you get a dashboard with how each episode is performing. We have built-in podcast websites for your show, so people can go to your domain name and see all your episodes and subscribe from there and get show notes. We have dynamic ad insertion, which is another feature that Jason built once he came on. So you can dynamically insert an announcement to your podcast listeners. You can tell them about an event. You can sell actual ad space, but that's essentially the business. It's a content management system for podcasters. They create their episodes in Transistor, they publish them, and manage their kind of publishing workflow through us, and then we do the hosting.
I do love this idea of the slow movement, and it makes me realize, I will occasionally watch podcasts, but for the most part, it's just listening. And it is one of those mediums where you're generally doing something else when you are listening. and you just get to be a fly on the wall to a great conversation, ideally.
So like social media is really designed to addict people, right? They want your eyeballs for as long as you can. So as long as you can keep people scrolling, accelerate their heart rate, outrage them or whatever, make them want to comment back or, reply back or whatever. That system was not appealing to us. And what was appealing about podcasting is it's old tech. It's slow tech. RSS has been around for a long time. It's very simple. It's distributed. It's right in the name. That's right. And there's something about the simplicity and this idea of slow media and slow tech. Meaning when you're listening to a podcast, first of all, it doesn't demand your eyeballs, right? It doesn't demand your complete attention. It's not designed really to addict you. It's like you listen to a podcast when you're commuting or when you're walking the dog or when you're working out. You can't also respond right away. You can't have a knee-jerk reaction. Like if somebody says something that upsets me on a show, I have to finish driving home, park the car, say hello to my family, and then find a way to contact them, write them an email, and then say what I think. There's just so much more time to have a considered reaction. It slows everything down.
Yeah.
And from a creator perspective, it's different as well because you're not beholden to the large platforms. So there's lots of stories of people who, at one point the algorithm was rewarding them and all of a sudden the algorithm took it away. And then all of a sudden they have no audience. Whereas podcasting, it's slower to build an audience, but you build a deep connection with the people who are listening. And once you have those folks there, as long as you have your RSS feed, and your RSS feed, you can bring it wherever you want. If you decide to leave Transistor, you can forward your RSS feed somewhere else and it just forwards the traffic right through. As long as you've got your RSS feed, you've got this connection with your audience. And I heard a couple of our customers, I listened to a lot of our customers' podcasts, and they were talking about, what would happen if Twitter went away? What happened if, Twitter just crumbles? And they said, man, well, we'd still have our podcast. There's less people who listen to our podcast and follow us on Twitter, but these are the real ones. These are the real fans. And if everything else crumbled, if Twitter went away, if Facebook went away, or if Facebook took away our reach or whatever, we'd still have this connection and these people who wake up every week looking for a show from us and, listen and have built this kind of ongoing long relationship with us.
So one thing that I wanted to ask, and Jason, this is probably more directed towards you, but Justin, if you have any anecdotes too that you want to throw in there, how have you overcome challenges that you faced while building with AI?
The foundation of all of it for podcasts is to have the information in some sort of format that you can use to do other things. So transcription was clearly like the first thing that we need to nail before we can add any other features around that. So that's sort of where we're starting. There are a lot of other nice things we can do with that, or things that we think could be useful. I think we do a better job than a lot of places supporting chapters for podcasts. So you can display at what timestamp you're talking about a certain thing in show notes and YouTube if you publish there, just like ways you can skip around in an episode and see what's going on.
Yeah. Like often technology is like a solution in search of a problem, right? And a lot of AI stuff can feel like that. It's like, this is just like, you're just trying to cram this solution and create a problem.
Yep.
So the biggest challenge, I think, is to go, is this something that people want? Is this something that podcasters want as creators? Is this something that podcast listeners want? What job does this do for them in their lives? And what is the kind of initial version of that we could make a bet on and then see what happens. The hard part is actually the user experience. It's the UI, right? Speaker identification especially is like a huge challenge. It's like on the engineering side, like how do we identify that this is the person speaking? And then on the UX side, like how can somebody identify who this is and type in their name and then maybe change it and then, label this section as this person, but not this section. That takes some thinking and some creativity. One of my concerns with AI is that because the underlying tech is so powerful, it's just easy to just like slap it in there without thinking about the user experience. How are people going to be using this? And, how can we make it easy? How can we make it easy or even better, magical? Like it just feels magical. So, it would be amazing. Jason's also done a lot of work in our show notes around, like you can insert a tag in your show notes that says chapters. And if your podcast editor has put in chapters in your MP3, we'll show those in your show notes. Here's the timestamp, Mm-hmm. And when you experience that feels magical. It's like, whoa, half my show notes are already written, And so, a next step for this would be something like, hey, we've already identified all the chapters in this episode for you. It's just right here. We've done the work for you. We're looking for those kinds of experiences, I think. But it's the challenging, like the engineering side is challenging because you want to make it right and you want to, have the accuracy as high as you can, and all that. The back end stuff has to be right, and then what you put on top is just even more important in some ways. Like how can you make this easy for people, intuitive for people, so that it's not adding more work? And my experience sometimes with AI is like sometimes it's more work at the end of the day, especially lately, like ChatGPT 4 or whatever. It feels like it's talking back to me a lot. Like it's like I'm like, hey, can you do this for me? It's like, I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that for you. It's like I can't. Well, and then people say you have to like just demand that it does it. Like don't be polite, and then you ask it 3 times, and then it'll do it. That's not a good experience. What we want is a good experience. So,
on the business case of transcription, one thing that I often think about is how you're either going to need to charge more to the end user, pass on that cost to the end user, or you're going to have to let that eat into your margin. How do you think about that?
This is the other advantage of wait and see. So we're like, let's wait and see what happens. And, since then we've had a number of competitors release AI transcription features, and some of them have more features on top, some of them have less. And then there's been a bunch of third-party apps that have come out as well. And often in a market, you're going to be anchored to whatever your competitors are doing. So if your competitors are offering it for free, it's going to be harder to charge. But if your competitors are charging for it, then it's going to be easier. And then you also have some sort of pricing anchor. And I think it's still a bet. We're going to see how it goes. And we've debated this. We've debated pricing on this a lot. Like that's
probably more than any other part of this feature has been.
Yeah, that's talking
pricing.
About challenges. That is a challenge because pricing is also product design. So when we were launching Transistor, I had this intuition as a podcaster that the normal thing at the time was you had to pay an extra monthly fee for every podcast you started. So if you were on Libsyn, you were paying them $19 a month for one podcast. If you wanted to start another podcast, you had to pay another monthly fee. And at the time, I'd done a bunch of podcasting experiments, so I had like 4 or 5 podcast feeds. And I said, John, I think we could charge a little bit more for Transistor, start at $19 a month, but allow people to host unlimited podcasts. So in a Transistor account, you can start as many podcasts as you want. You can invite people to those podcasts to collaborate with you. So like our podcast editor, he logs into Transistor and he only sees the shows that he's been invited to. That pricing decision ended up being a product decision. because some people were looking for that feature. It became a feature of the product. And early on, like that was a lot of our growth, was we were really one of the only people doing that. And so anyone that wanted to start more than one show, or if you were an agency or a business with more than one show, or even if you just had a bunch of friends that you podcasted with and you're all individually paying for different shows, you could just bring it all home to Transistor and pay one price. So pricing decisions are crucial. That you can't make that decision. And that decision, we did multiple episodes of our podcast. We have a podcast called Build Your SaaS where we like wrestle with a lot of these things. And we did multiple episodes on pricing because it was like, this is a big decision. And we got to make sure we're thinking about everything. Like, what are the repercussions of multiple podcasts per account? What are the repercussions? What do we price based on? What's our value metric? How does that interface with our costs, bandwidth, hosting, all that other stuff? So pricing is not, pricing is difficult. It's difficult to do it well. And it also has this tremendous opportunity because it can become a real feature of your product that people are seeking. And if you get the pricing part right, you can attract, all sorts of people that you might not normally have attracted. But there's a tension in all these ideas. You got your price, and then you got your costs, you got your margins, are people even wanting that? Like, pricing is a whole science and art unto itself. So this one we just did our team retreat, and we were just like debating it a lot.
This one's different for us because I think it's the first thing that has like directly measurable variable costs. Everything else that we've built, it might need more system resources, it might need more storage, but those things it doesn't scale linearly with the usage. But this is like, if we do 10,000 hours of transcription, we have to pay for 10,000 hours of transcription. So it's a lot different way to have to think about it than we have in the past.
Guys, I've taken up a ton of your time. I really appreciate you coming on here. I think we can cut it now. And for anybody that is
I'm just getting fired up now, man. Let's do another 2 hours.
You caught Justin after he's had 3 coffees right in the morning.
Ready for more pricing conversation and AI and all the fun stuff. I really appreciate you all being part of the Deepgram startup community. I want to just publicly say that, and it is super cool to have you in there, and I look forward to all the incredible stuff that we can do together.
Thanks, man. This is great.
Us too. Thanks.